Namo Aditapa. Thanks so much for joining me for our daily practice check-in. Listen, listen, listen. This beautiful sound calls us back to our true home. The fifth mindfulness training. Aware of the suffering caused by unmindful consumption, I vow to cultivate good health, both physical and mental, for myself, my family, and my society, by practicing mindful eating, drinking, and consuming. I will ingest only items that preserve peace, well-being, and joy in my body, in my consciousness, and in the collective body and consciousness of my family and society. I'm determined not to use alcohol or any other items that contain toxins, such as certain TV programs, magazines, books, films, and conversations. I'm aware that to damage my body or my consciousness with these poisons is to betray my ancestors, my parents, my society, and future generations. I will work to transform violence, fear, anger, and confusion in myself and in society by practicing a diet for myself and for society. I understand that a proper diet is crucial for self-transformation and the transformation of society. For our Dharma lessons, we're reading Ajahn Munindo's book, Unexpected Freedom. This morning we're finishing a chapter on a question of identity and a section on coming home. Question: could you say a bit more about having a personality? Does what you have been saying only apply to us, or do arhants have personalities too? Ajahn Munindo: that's a very good question. I can't say that I've ever sat down for a heart-to-heart sharing with an arhat and said, how do you feel about your personality? Though I'd like to. I think the closest I've ever come to it is conversations I've had with Ajahn Chah and Ajahn Tate. Whether they were arhats or not, I do not know. Actually, I don't find talking about whether or not somebody is an arhat very appropriate. To me, the state of purity of somebody's heart is an intensely personal matter. What I do have confidence in is that both were great monks who were very well acquainted with reality and practice. However, the question remains. When Ajahn Chah was questioned along these lines, he persistently told people that it was none of their business and to get on with their own practice. Yet on one occasion, apparently when he was asked whether he was an arhat, he said, my experience is like being a tree. I've got branches and leaves and berries and fruits and so on, and the birds come along and they sit in the branches and they eat the fruit. Some say it's sweet, some say it's sour, and they go on about whether they like it or dislike it and so on and so forth. That's just chattering. That's just the chattering of the birds. That's just what they do. So I just am what I am. You call me an arhat or not. You can say what you like about it. It's similar to the question as to whether or not an arhat has a personality. We could discuss the dynamics of an arhat's behavior from the perspective of being an observer, and we could say, well, their personality is like this, or their personality is like that. I'm speculating here, but I would imagine that from the perspective of the arhat, they don't have a personality. I would suggest that perhaps it's more useful to see how we have things. Ajahn Chah often spoke about having and not having as being the same thing. He said, hi me, my me, make having, not having. Have, but don't have. Having and not having need to be seen as the same thing. And he would say, like this cup here, actually, you can have this cup, but you have to know also how to not have it. And when having and not having are the same thing, then you're free. There's having with attachment, and there's having without attachment. And there's a big difference between the two, a huge difference. So I would expect that an arhat could be quite articulate in talking about tendencies of his or her mind and commenting on their own behavior patterns, but there could be a very tangible sense of equanimity. They would be having without having. They'd be having without grasping, and that's what makes the difference. The characteristic of an arhat is that their heart is completely free from all tendencies of clinging. All manifestations of ignorance and conceit have been removed. And so, according to the Buddhist teaching, all their activity is governed by wisdom and compassion. This does not mean they are always perfect in all the decisions they make. They're only perfect in the sense that they are incapable of becoming caught up in any unwholesome states. The Buddha had to reprimand one particular arhat for his decision to not attend the recitation of the monastic rule, Patimokkha. Because he was free from all impurities of heart, this monk figured he did not have to join with the rest of the Sangha for their fortnightly gatherings. From the perspective of the Buddha's superior insight, this was a misjudgment, because it could have led less realized members of the Sangha to bad practice. Neither does it mean that you'll like all these manifestations of wisdom and compassion. We could be in the company of an arhat and feel thoroughly annoyed, really disliking them. They may have grown up in an environment where they weren't taught proper hygiene, for instance, or they might have bad breath, or an accent we find unattractive, or they may not have washed their robes or something, and to them, according to their particular conditioning, that's perfectly acceptable. Or they may even have a rather grubby sense of humor. I've known some people who were pretty much like arhats, and they used to enjoy rather coarse jokes. You may not find that agreeable. You might say, that person can't be an arhat. He's too vulgar to be an arhat. But the Buddha said that you couldn't tell an arhat by looking at the outside. The outside's not just the complexion of their skin or their bodily features. It's everything that you can perceive from the outside, including what we might call personality. You have to be an arhat to know an arhat. There are several stories in the scriptures which undermine some of the assumptions people might have about how an enlightened being would appear. One is from the sutta called the Lankuttaka Bhaddiya from the Samyutta Nikaya. In this sutta, the Buddha mentions a monk who is called Bhaddiya, who says he is ugly, unpleasing, and even despised. Yet this same monk has arrived at and fully realized that uttermost goal of the holy life. The Dhammapada verse 408 says, "Those who speak truth and give gentle encouragement, contending with no one, these do I call great beings." It is explained in the commentaries that this verse was uttered by the Buddha in reference to incidents involving an elder monk called Vacha, who was in the habit of addressing everyone in a patronizing, even abusive manner. He called people wretched and vile, which of course wasn't what they had come to expect from a Buddhist monk. With their feelings hurt, they went to see the Buddha, who, on hearing their complaint, looked into the mind of Bhikkhu Vacha. The Buddha saw that this monk's heart was completely free from any intention to cause harm. Indeed, he was a fully awakened arhat, and the reason he spoke in such a way was because of deep but completely innocuous character traits. So the Buddha took the occasion to explain this matter, saying that it is possible for such an enlightened person to appear offensive, but be inwardly perfectly pure. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be peaceful. Namo Adida Phat. Thanks so much for joining me today.